Matt Brown has served as Rhode Island's Secretary of State and is running to be our governor. Matt is dedicated to creating an economy that works for all the people of Rhode Island. He wants to increase the minimum wage, support small businesses, and create thousands of new jobs. Among his other goals are to improve the quality of education, make Rhode Island 100% reliant on renewable energy, hold gun manufacturers accountable, and provide protections for immigrants. Matt.
Thank you very much. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
All right. So thank you all for coming out. Thank you for the extraordinary work you're doing. This is an amazing turnout here. There's really something happening, which we'll talk about a little bit in a few minutes, but it's very, very encouraging. So I'll tell you just a little bit about why I'm running and what I think the issues are, and then would love to hear your questions. So I've been blessed to have great family and great friends, and one of my great friends who's also been a mentor to me over the years is a man named John Lewis, who some of you may know. He's a civil rights hero. He led the march over the Edmund Pettus Bridge on so-called Bloody Sunday in March of 1965, fighting for voting rights. And he was met by the billy clubs of the Alabama State Troopers. And he was billy clubbed into unconsciousness, and he and the other young marchers were gassed. He was maybe in his early 20s at the time. And I've spent many hours and many late nights sitting up with John Lewis, one-on-one, learning from him about what it takes to change a system that is hurting people, that is morally wrong, that is corrupt, but seems to have all the power. And what John Lewis has said to me many times is very simple, which is the first thing you have to do to change a system like that is get in the way. You just have to get in the way. And that's what I'm setting out to do here. I've done it throughout my life. It's not easy. You get knocked back sometimes, but you got to get up and you got to keep going, and you got to get more people to join you in getting in the way of that system. And I would argue that the system we have now, the economic political system that we have, is morally, financially, and politically corrupt. It is a system that for a long time has worked for large corporations, for the very, very wealthy people at the top, at the expense of everybody else. And you wonder, because this is a democracy, why and how that could be. Why is it that we have a system that for so long has been so harmful to the people while supporting and enriching and backing those with the power and the money? And I think the answer is that politicians want to get in power and they want to stay in power. And the corporations and the banks and the very wealthy have the money to funnel them campaign contributions to help them get that power. And that's how the system works. And it is corrupt. And I believe that our current governor is deeply immersed in and part of that system. So she goes around the country spending a huge amount of time raising contributions from big corporations, big banks, and the wealthy, and then turns around and takes taxpayers' money, our money, and gives handouts to those corporations. And that's how we end up in a situation where people and communities simply do not have enough. That's how we end up in the situation we have today, where the costs of everything that people need have been going up and up and up, and they are still going up. The cost of health care, the cost of college, of child care, of housing. While at the same time, what people get paid, wages and incomes, have flatlined. They've been stagnant, declining and stagnant for 4 decades, and they still are. So that simple economic fact, you can set aside the stock market, you can set aside GDP, you can set aside all those numbers that are put forward by the media. The only economic fact that matters in people's lives is that everything costs more and people don't make any more than they used to. And that means life is getting harder for people. And they're worried about that. And they're worried about their kids, because this doesn't seem to have an end in sight and nobody's doing anything about it. And it's not just people in their homes and their lives that are struggling, it's whole communities that have been bankrupt by this system. That's why the school buildings are falling apart, and we should never get used to the fact that the school buildings are literally falling apart in this state. And we'll talk a little bit about why that is. because I don't think people are talking about why that is enough and what we need to really do about it. The fact that our hospitals, our healthcare system is broken. Our hospitals are literally bankrupt and closing. We're trying to sell themselves to out-of-state corporations. The fact that the Latino children in this state are getting the worst education of Latino children in any state in the country. We're 50th out of 50. The fact that we have the highest poverty rate in New England. So all of these things are a sign of a broken system. And a system that has been working for the few at the expense of the many for a long, long time. And a system that, as I said, I think is morally and financially and politically corrupt. And at its base is a system that's not looking out for people. So I want to get in the way of that system. I want to change it. I want to start to create something new. And I've spent my whole life starting and running organizations that are dedicated to looking out for people. So 25 years ago, I helped to start City Year here in Rhode Island. City Year, some people may know, gets young people to do full-time community service, tutoring and mentoring children in public schools, and they get a scholarship for college at the end of that service. Then I ran against an incumbent in a primary, fully backed by the political establishment. Does this sound familiar to what we're doing now? And we won that election with grassroots support and went on to win the general election with 68% of the vote. And as Secretary of State, I took on the corporate lobbyists to make government more transparent and accountable so that it would work for people and not just for the well-financed and the well-connected. And then I started an international organization called Global Zero that works to reduce the threat of war, works to reduce the threat of violence globally, works to reduce nuclear weapons and ultimately eliminate them, to make the world safer for us and for our kids and for generations to come. So I come to this job believing that the role of governor is not to try to sell the state to out-of-state corporations to come here. The role of governor every day is to look out for the people. And I think there's a few things that we need to do to make that happen. One is that I will end the corporate handouts from taxpayers and build an economy that works for people, that brings money, opportunity, economic power back to people and back to communities. One way we can do that is to build on some of the things we have in this state, like wind off the coast. So I'm opposed to, and I believe we need to block the construction of a fracked gas plant that would be polluting, that would be harmful, that would make it impossible to meet even the timid carbon reduction goals that the state has now. And instead, I've got a plan to make Rhode Island the first state in the country that is powered 100% by renewable energy. But not only that, because of the wind we have, we can produce all the energy we need and produce a surplus so that we would be able to export renewable energy to the region as a revenue and as a source of industry and jobs. It would be 10,000 jobs to do a clean energy economy in the state. Those are jobs that can never be outsourced. And I'm also proposing that we do like they do in Alaska, but we do it here with wind instead of the way they do it with oil, which is that everybody in the state gets a share of those profits, gets a dividend. Why? Because the sun and the wind and the water shouldn't be owned by any corporation. It doesn't belong to them. Those are our shared natural resources. Corporations should get some of that, but the people should get some of those profits as well. We also have to restore the Medicaid funds that have been cut drastically. This governor is one of only 2 Democratic governors in the state, the other one being the governor of Louisiana, that have cut Medicaid, while the Trump administration is cutting Medicaid. Now that's bad because it hurts people who are vulnerable. It's also bad economics. One of the things we could have in this state would be a strong healthcare economy. We've got one of the best medical schools in the country in Brown University. But instead, cutting Medicaid has broken that system. The hospitals, the healthcare providers, and as I said, a number of them have closed and others are trying to sell themselves to out-of-state corporations, which would be a disaster for the quality of healthcare, but also a disaster for our economy. So I would restore those Medicaid funds and work toward a single-payer Medicare for all system in this state so everybody has the healthcare that they need and they can afford it. Our schools. Yes, we have to do a bond to fix the school buildings. But first of all, that's not enough. It's about half of what we actually need to fix the buildings. And secondly, we've got to ask ourselves how we got in a situation where the school buildings are falling apart in the first place. And how did we get it to a situation where we can't provide a good education to all of our kids? How did we get into a situation where we're 50th out of the 50 states for the education of Latino children? And the answer is that about 20 years ago, our state, and it's still happening today under this governor, bought into a failed right-wing economic theory of trickle-down economics. So they started to cut taxes on the wealthiest and taxes on corporations. And this governor supports those tax cuts for the wealthiest and corporations. What happened was children didn't go away, right? You ignore someone, they don't go away. They still needed to be educated. We just didn't provide the funding for it anymore. And so the school buildings fell apart. And we failed to provide a good education going on now for 2 or 3 generations of children in this state. So I'm calling for repealing those tax cuts on the wealthiest and corporations and funding our schools again. And investing in our children again. And making class sizes smaller and supporting teachers. And doing all the things we need to do. English language learner programs for those Latino children. So these are some of the things that we need to do, but I think going back to what I said at the beginning, it has to start with breaking the legalized bribery of our political system, which is all the money from corporations and the wealthy that flow to the pockets of politicians that influence and to some degree control the policies that they make. So I've taken a pledge to not take any money from corporate PACs or lobbyists, to not take any money from the fossil fuel industry. I signed a national pledge on that just the other day. But to do any of these things, of course, we need to win. We need to win the election. So how do we do that up against this establishment, up against this system, up against a candidate who raises piles and piles of money from around the country? Well, the first thing I'd say is I do have a little experience in running and winning these kind of campaigns. As I said, I did run against an incumbent with the full backing of the establishment a while back and won that campaign with grassroots support. Won that campaign with ideas about how we're going to solve problems and do things here. So we'll do that also. I do think we are on the right side of history here. I think that the state and the country are onto the fact that these policies, these kind of right-wing economic policies, these policies that hurt people and help corporations and help the wealthy, that their day is done. And so I think we're on the right side of history here, and so I think our ideas are going to help us win the day. I also think the fact that people like you and groups like Indivisible exist, we've got to remember this is all new. All the groups that are forming, that are rising, that are meeting to support ideas like this, to support this kind of change, who believe that the system is broken and that we need to make big changes, that's really new. I mean, that's grown up in just the last few years. That's an unknown force in a governor's race in this state. I know you've done some great work getting legislators elected. But this will be the first time these groups go to work, I hope, for a governor's race. I think it's going to be very powerful, and I don't think that the system sees it coming. And I think that you are going to surprise everyone, and maybe together we can surprise everyone. So I'd also say that this current governor does extremely well with donors, but has never done hugely well with voters. And in the end, voters decide elections, not donors. And she got, as you know, the incumbent has never gotten over 42% in an election. So I think we're in good shape when it comes to voters. We just need to get the message out. We're going to do that in a grassroots way. The last thing I would say is that I do think that there are people out there who are tired, who are exhausted. It's been decades, really, of this system wearing people down. And I think we've got to break through that apathy. And in your organizing and outreach, you've got to break through that apathy. And you've got to, you can't, in my view, you can't give people hope, but you need to tell them that they've got to go find it if they've lost it. And everybody has their own place and way of finding it. And they've got to do that. They've got to find that voice that I think we have inside us, each of us, that says that it's not supposed to be this way, that it's not supposed to be this hard, that it's not supposed to be such a constant struggle, that there's not supposed to be this kind of fear and anxiety that people are facing. It's like some kind of a mystical memory that we have, that there's something better that's out there for us. And we need to tap into that hope, and you need to tap into that hope. And then we need to turn that hope into organizing and ultimately into voting. And I think that's how we're going to win. So I'm here to ask for your support, for your endorsement. It would make a huge difference for our campaign. We've got a lot of momentum, and that would certainly add to it. and I appreciate you very much being here and giving me the opportunity today. Thank you. So questions? We do a few questions. Yes, we can do a few questions or comments or thoughts. Yes.
My question is, how much financial trouble are we really in this state? What does our budget look like versus our needs?
Well, you know, our government has told us for a long time that the reason that we can't fund the schools, the reason that Medicaid has been cut, the reason that affordable housing has been cut, the reason that this governor has taken money from emergency services, the 911 fund, and environmental protection, and so on, is that there's not enough money. And so we got to cut somewhere. But first of all, I would note that one place we haven't cut, that we've actually spent more and more on, is handouts to large corporations. So why do we have money for that, but we don't have money to educate our kids? Why do we have money for that, but we don't have money to support people who need Medicaid? Why do we have that, but we don't have money to protect the environment? We don't have money for water drinking protection. This governor took a fund that the governor took from to fund corporate giveaways. By the way, they're not even incentives. They call them incentives, but there are a lot of studies, and a lot of other states have been smart enough to figure this out, that that's not how corporations decide where to locate. This money is our money, our taxpayer money that we so desperately need because people here a lot of people here are struggling to get by. It's a drop in the bucket for these multinational corporations, $20 million. So they're not even incentives. But why do we have money for that, but we don't have money to meet all these other needs? So that's number one. There is money. It depends on what one's priorities are, right? Secondly, I'd say that there is money that we're not even using. And this goes to an idea I've put forward that the state of North Dakota did 100 years ago, when they didn't have enough money because there was a lot of concentration of wealth back then. And so they took the money back from the big banks and they invested it in their state. And I think we should do the same thing here. Here's how it works. Right now, our state takes about $2.5 billion every year of our taxpayers' money, and they invest it, deposit it in Wall Street banks. Those banks then invest it all over the world, building infrastructure in China and Dubai and everywhere else, and they keep the profits. One place they do not invest our own money is in Rhode Island. So I'm suggesting we take the money out of those banks and we invest it here in the state. We invest in affordable housing, we invest in clean energy, we invest in these things that we need, and generate profit from that, which would be a new source of revenue without raising taxes, property taxes on the middle class, that we could continue to use to invest in the state. So I would argue that that there is money that we're not using to meet the needs that we have. We're just spending it incorrectly and wrongly. I'd say one other thing, which is that this way, if the taxpayer giveaways to corporations is not going to build the economy. It's just shifting wealth from the middle class to corporations and their CEOs. That's all it's doing. It's not going to build the economy. We're going to build the economy by doing things based on what we have here in this state. Like we have wind, let's be a clean energy economy. We have a great medical school, let's have a strong healthcare economy. Let's not break it by cutting Medicaid. We have a demand for affordable housing in this state. We're one of the worst states in the country in terms of affordable housing. We've got builders who want to build that housing. But we've got all kinds of archaic zoning laws that are making that impossible. Let's change those. We could solve the affordable housing problem, and we could unlock a massive jobs boom, but not by building huge buildings in Providence for corporations, but by building houses for people who need housing that they can afford. So there are a lot of other ways to build an economy without taking money from taxpayers and giving it to big corporations. That would create, to your question, more money, more wealth in our communities and in people's pockets. Yes?
Hi, good afternoon. Susan Razzle from Newport. I'm very concerned about offshore drilling, considering where I live. What are your views on that, and will you help to stop it? And the other is, will you work toward the reproductive health care, getting that passed so that state's women can have a safety net in case Roe v. Wade fails?
So on the second question, absolutely. I've always been unequivocally pro-choice. I still am. I think it's something, you know, it's not, there's no point you know, it's not leadership to do it when it's easy. So you often hear this from politicians. That fight's too hard. To me, that's the whole point. If you don't want to fight, do something else. That's what political leadership is. You know, if you don't want to get in the fight, then really, there are lots of other good ways to spend one's time. But it's not being in politics, you know, so, and same with the first question. So, climate change, I've got a 10-year-old boy and I have a 12-year-old girl. And in my view, if you are not fighting to stop drilling oil, digging for coal, burning gas, building fossil fuel infrastructure, you need to get out of politics now. You are disqualified. You are disqualified from leadership because the world is nearly on fire, and it will be, continue to be, and get worse for our children. So I think this is another issue where, you know, so you get it, you're the governor here, our current governor, you get campaign contributions from a company, and then you invite them to our state to burn frack gas and diesel oil. And I've been there to Burnville. I've talked to people who live up on Bucks Hill, where it's going to be spewing out toxic fumes. Talk to the people who have children there with asthma who already know they're going to have to sell their homes and leave their family homes if this is built. Why would somebody do this? What is good about this? We do not need the gas. We've been told that by the New England grid operator. We don't need the gas. It's holding us back from investing in clean energy, which is the future of the economy. It's going to keep us in the 19th century economy, literally, not the 20th, the 19th century burning this stuff. And it's going to hurt people. And it's going to make it impossible to solve the climate change problem. So I think, to me, these are the reasons you get into politics. You know, in some ways, it's a tough road. It's busy and it's difficult and so on. The whole point is to fight the fights that need to be fought. And I certainly think that we need to fight the fight of stopping to continue to drill for oil and burn gas and burn coal and build fossil fuel infrastructure in this state. Okay, thank you all very much.